There is a particular kind of frustration that comes from knowing exactly what to do and still finding it difficult to act. You understand the situation clearly. You know what would help. You can explain the logic behind it. And yet, nothing feels easier. The hesitation is still there. The resistance hasn't changed. This creates a quiet contradiction. If clarity is present, why does the difficulty remain? Most people expect understanding to reduce effort. They assume that once something makes sense, action should follow naturally. When that doesn't happen, confusion sets in. Not panic, not distress, just a persistent sense that something isn't lining up. From the outside, it looks like the hardest part has already been done. The problem is identified, the solution is known, but internally, the experience hasn't shifted. Knowing what to do hasn't altered how it feels to do it. That mismatch is what makes this experience so unsettling. Understanding is often treated as a turning point, a moment where difficulty should decrease and progress should accelerate. But understanding doesn't change behavior directly. It changes interpretation. It explains what's happening, but it doesn't reconfigure the systems that produce action. Those systems rely on familiarity, repetition, and safety, rather than logic. This is why insight often fails to deliver the relief people expect. You can fully understand a pattern and still feel compelled to repeat it. Knowledge lives in conscious awareness. Behavior operates at a deeper level. When people expect understanding to alter behavior on its own, they place unrealistic demands on insight. When those demands aren't met, frustration turns inward. The problem isn't that understanding failed. It's that understanding was asked to do work it was never designed to do. Explanation clarifies. Change requires integration. The distance between insight and action is where most people quietly get stuck. Insight can arrive suddenly. Action changes slowly. This difference in timing creates tension. You feel mentally ready to move, but the systems responsible for action haven't adjusted yet. They still respond according to familiar patterns. This delay feels like resistance, but it isn't opposition, it's recalibration. The system is learning how to operate differently without destabilizing itself. That process takes time, regardless of how clear the insight is. Because insight feels decisive, the delay feels wrong. The mind assumes something should be happening already. When nothing changes externally, it's easy to assume the insight wasn't real or wasn't enough. In reality, insight is only the beginning. Action follows at the pace of adaptation, not understanding. Clarity doesn't reduce effort because effort isn't caused by confusion. Effort is caused by change. Any meaningful change requires energy even when the direction is clear. Understanding explains why effort is necessary, but it doesn't remove the cost. This is why moments of clarity are often followed by disappointment. People expect relief. Instead, they feel the same difficulty with greater awareness. That awareness can make effort feel heavier, not lighter, because it removes uncertainty. You know what needs to happen, but knowing doesn't make the work disappear. The discomfort that follows clarity isn't a sign that something went wrong. It's a sign that the system has moved from explanation into integration, and integration always requires sustained effort before it begins to feel easier. Habit systems do not respond to understanding in the way people expect. They are not designed to evaluate logic or intention. Their purpose is efficiency and predictability. Once a behavior becomes familiar, it requires less energy to repeat than to change. Understanding a habit does not dismantle it. It only makes it visible. Visibility can feel powerful, but it does not automatically alter the system responsible for action. This is why people often feel surprised by their own behavior after gaining insight. They expect awareness to interrupt the pattern. When it doesn't, they assume something is wrong, but nothing is malfunctioning. The habit system continues to prioritize what is known over what is correct. Changing that priority requires repeated exposure to new behavior, not explanation. Until repetition reshapes familiarity, behavior remains governed by what feels predictable rather than what makes sense. Knowing what to do often increases pressure instead of reducing it. Before clarity, there is ambiguity. Ambiguity allows delay without judgment. Once clarity arrives, that space disappears. Expectations increase. You know what needs to happen, so hesitation feels less acceptable. This added pressure can make action feel heavier than before. The task hasn't changed, but the internal stakes have. Many people misinterpret this pressure as resistance or avoidance, when it's actually an overload response. The system tightens when expectations rise too quickly. Instead of facilitating movement, pressure constrains it. This is why people sometimes feel less capable after understanding than before. The difficulty isn't laziness or fear. It's the system reacting to increased demand without sufficient time to adapt. Understanding creates a sense of readiness that doesn't always reflect reality. You feel prepared because the situation makes sense, but readiness exists on multiple levels. Cognitive readiness often arrives first. Behavioral readiness lags behind. Emotional readiness may lag even further. When these layers are misaligned, action feels difficult despite clarity. People assume readiness is a single switch. When action doesn't follow understanding, they conclude they aren't truly ready, but readiness is gradual. Some systems adjust quickly, others need time. The discomfort that appears after insight isn't proof that readiness was false. It's proof that different systems are still catching up. Effort feels heavy, because effort is not just about doing something new. It's about regulating uncertainty while doing it. Even when the direction is clear, the system must maintain stability while changing behavior. That balancing act consumes energy. Understanding does not remove this cost. It simply explains why the cost exists. This is why people often feel discouraged after moments of clarity. They expected effort to decrease. Instead, it stays the same, or even increases temporarily. That increase isn't a setback. It's a sign that the system is actively working to integrate change. Effort becomes lighter only after new behavior becomes familiar enough to require less regulation. Until then, heaviness is part of the process, not a sign of failure. Awareness changes how effort is experienced. Before awareness, behavior can operate automatically. After awareness, action becomes deliberate. Deliberation requires energy. Each decision is now conscious rather than habitual. This shift often makes things feel harder, not easier. People mistake this increase in effort as resistance when it's actually the cost of operating in a more conscious mode. Awareness removes autopilot. While that sounds positive, it also removes efficiency. The system is temporarily running manually. That manual operation is tiring. Over time, new behaviors can become automatic again, but that transition requires repetition. During this phase, effort feels heavier because the system is learning a new pattern without the benefit of familiarity. The difficulty isn't evidence that awareness failed. It's evidence that awareness has taken effect and changed how behavior is regulated. When knowing doesn't make things easier, people often interpret the difficulty as failure. They assume understanding should have solved the problem. When it doesn't, they conclude something is wrong with them. This interpretation is understandable but incorrect. Nothing has failed. The process is simply incomplete. Awareness arrives first. Integration follows later. Mistaking early difficulty for failure creates unnecessary urgency. People try to force change before the system is ready. That forcing increases tension rather than progress. The issue isn't that insight was ineffective. It's that insight was expected to do more than it can. When this distinction isn't recognized, people abandon change prematurely, believing they've already proven it won't work. Explanation and integration are often confused. Explanation answers why something happens. Integration changes how it happens. Explanation is fast. Integration is slow. You can explain a behavior in minutes, but altering it takes time. Expecting explanation to produce integration collapses two different processes into one. That collapse creates disappointment. People assume understanding should automatically change behavior, When it doesn't, they question the value of understanding itself. But explanation still serves an important function. It provides orientation, it tells you what you're dealing with. Integration requires repetition, exposure, and tolerance for discomfort. These processes operate independently of insight, even though insight can support them. Repetition rarely feels meaningful while it's happening. It doesn't feel intelligent or insightful. It feels monotonous. This makes it easy to underestimate its role in change. But repetition is how systems learn. It's how behavior becomes less effortful over time. Understanding can justify repetition, but it cannot replace it. This is why people often feel disconnected during repetition. The mind looks for novelty or progress signals. When they aren't present, repetition feels pointless. In reality, repetition is laying the groundwork for familiarity. Familiarity reduces effort, but familiarity develops quietly. Without recognizing this, people stop repeating too early, not because repetition failed, but because it didn't feel rewarding fast enough. After understanding arrives, there is often a phase where nothing feels resolved. You know more than before, but nothing feels easier yet. This middle phase is uncomfortable because it lacks feedback. The old way no longer feels right, but the new way doesn't feel natural. This creates a sense of suspension. You're no longer ignorant, but you're not integrated either. Many people misinterpret this phase as stagnation. They assume they've stopped progressing. In reality, this phase is transitional. The system is reorganizing how it responds. That reorganization doesn't produce visible results immediately. It produces uncertainty, and uncertainty is difficult to tolerate. This is often where people abandon change, not because it isn't working, but because it doesn't feel like progress. The middle phase isn't a failure state. It's a necessary bridge between insight and stability. When knowing doesn't make things easier, it's tempting to look for better methods, new explanations, new frameworks, new systems. The assumption is that something is missing, but often nothing is missing. The system simply hasn't had time to adapt. Changing methods creates movement. It feels active. But that activity doesn't always produce progress. Each new method resets adaptation. The system has to start integrating again. This creates the illusion of productivity while delaying results. Staying with one approach long enough for it to integrate often feels passive by comparison. But it's not passive, it's patient. Method switching feels intelligent because it introduces novelty. Integration feels dull because it relies on repetition. Confusing novelty with effectiveness keeps people cycling without settling. Understanding plays a specific role in change. It tells you where you are. It explains what you're dealing with. But it doesn't generate movement on its own. It's orientation, not propulsion. Expecting understanding to push you forward is like expecting a map to walk for you. The map is essential, but movement still requires time and energy. When people treat understanding as propulsion, they feel disappointed when nothing accelerates. That disappointment isn't evidence that understanding is useless. It's evidence that its role was misunderstood. Understanding removes confusion. It does not remove effort. Effort decreases later, after integration has occurred. Expecting understanding to shorten that process creates unnecessary frustration. Once you understand what's happening, slowing down feels counterintuitive. You feel like movement should increase, not stall. When progress remains slow, it feels like resistance. But slowing down often signals careful integration. The system is testing new behavior under low-risk conditions. It's checking for stability before committing. This testing phase doesn't feel productive because it's subtle. There are no obvious signs that something is changing, but beneath the surface, patterns are being reinforced. Slowing down isn't avoidance in this context. It's consolidation. Mistaking consolidation for hesitation leads people to interfere unnecessarily. They push when the system is trying to stabilize. That push often creates more friction than progress. Knowing what to do does change something important, even if it doesn't make action easier. It changes interpretation. Before understanding, difficulty feels confusing. After understanding, difficulty becomes contextual. You begin to see why effort feels heavy instead of assuming it shouldn't. This doesn't remove the work, but it removes unnecessary self-judgment. Knowing doesn't accelerate change, it reframes it. That reframing matters because it prevents misinterpretation. When difficulty is misunderstood, people add pressure. When difficulty is understood, people add tolerance. This tolerance doesn't produce speed, but it allows continuity. Continuity is what eventually leads to integration. Understanding doesn't move the system forward directly. It prevents it from being pulled backward by false conclusions about what difficulty means. Difficulty is often interpreted as evidence of inability. If something feels hard, people assume they aren't capable. But difficulty is a normal feature of adaptation. Learning new patterns requires energy. That energy expenditure feels uncomfortable before it feels efficient. Difficulty indicates that the system is operating outside of familiar territory. It doesn't indicate that change is impossible. When people treat difficulty as a warning sign, they withdraw prematurely. When they treat it as a signal of adaptation, they continue. The experience doesn't change immediately, but the meaning does, and meaning influences behavior. Difficulty only becomes a barrier when it's interpreted as failure rather than transition. Integration doesn't announce itself. It happens quietly over time. Behaviors begin to require less effort. Responses feel less forced. But these changes are subtle. They're easy to miss while they're happening. This creates the illusion that nothing has changed until suddenly things feel easier. In reality, the system has been adjusting all along. Integration works through accumulation, not breakthroughs. Each repetition strengthens familiarity. Each familiar response reduces effort slightly. Over time, those small reductions add up. But because the change is gradual, it often goes unnoticed. People assume progress appeared suddenly, when it was actually built slowly. Patience is often misunderstood as waiting. In this context, patience is restraint. It's the decision not to interfere with adaptation while it's underway. It's allowing repetition to do its work without constantly reassessing whether it's effective. This restraint requires effort. It's not passive. Patience doesn't make change faster, but impatience often makes it slower. When people intervene too early, they disrupt integration. They reset the process. Patience allows the system to stabilize before new demands are added. This stability is what eventually reduces effort. Without patience, change remains fragile. With it, change becomes durable. When progress feels slow, the instinct is to force momentum. People add pressure, increase goals, or demand consistency. This feels logical. If movement is lacking, apply force. But systems don't respond to pressure the way machines do. Pressure increases friction. It narrows tolerance. Instead of making action easier, it makes resistance louder. Forcing momentum often triggers avoidance, not progress. The system interprets pressure as threat, not motivation. That threat response diverts energy away from learning and toward protection. As a result, effort feels heavier, not lighter. The absence of momentum isn't usually caused by laziness. It's caused by instability. Forcing movement before stability exists doesn't create traction. It creates strain. Momentum emerges naturally once effort drops below a certain threshold. Pressure raises that threshold. Reducing interference lowers it. Consistency is often misunderstood as intensity repeated over time. But consistency doesn't require intensity. It requires predictability. Small actions performed regularly allow the system to adapt without overload. Intensity feels productive because it's noticeable. But noticeable effort isn't the same as effective effort. High intensity demands recovery. Low intensity allows continuation. The system learns faster when it isn't constantly recovering from stress. Consistency works by normalizing behavior. Once something feels normal, resistance fades. That normalization cannot occur under constant strain. Intensity keeps behavior marked as exceptional. Consistency turns it ordinary. Progress doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from making the action unremarkable. Progress often feels invisible because it happens internally before it appears externally. Neural patterns adjust before behavior stabilizes. Effort decreases before results improve. This creates a lag that's difficult to tolerate. People expect visible change to confirm internal progress. When it doesn't appear, they assume nothing is happening. But internal change precedes external outcomes. This delay isn't a flaw, it's a requirement. Without internal stabilization, external change collapses under pressure. The system needs time to confirm safety, familiarity, and reliability. Only then does behavior become consistent. The invisibility of progress doesn't mean absence, it means preparation. Progress sticks when effort decreases, not when motivation increases. Motivation fluctuates. Reduced effort endures. Understanding sets direction. Consistency builds familiarity. Patience allows integration. Together, these conditions lower resistance. When resistance drops, action becomes easier without force. This is why lasting change often looks quiet. There's no dramatic breakthrough. There's no surge of energy. There's simply less friction. Progress doesn't feel like pushing forward. It feels like not being pulled back. When effort finally feels lighter, it's not because you tried harder. It's because the system adapted. And that adaptation required time, not pressure.